Today's guest has been through very deep betrayal, abuse, and trauma. But she didn't let that define her story, and I love that. Today, she's here to share the hope and the healing she found in Jesus and how you can have that as well, no matter what your story is. Kimberly Haar, welcome to Healing Time.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here because you represent what I have seen for 40 years, which is the miracle of a woman to be able to take the bullets, pop them out, and then help other women. You know, you're my hero. I've dedicated my life to women like you. So I wanted you to share your story. Start somewhere, you know, you got married, and like every good Christian girl, you thought this was going to be, right, happily ever after.
It was.
Pick us up from there.
Yes, I got married very early. I was in my early 20s. And like you said, it was going to be happily ever after, but not very long after we got married, I discovered that my now ex-husband was involved in some infidelities, pornography, you know, sexual things. And because we had started having a family, we had children, I made the choice to stay in that marriage.
Sure.
I didn't want them going between homes, and so I would forgive and forgive and forgive again, but I did not have healthy boundaries.
Right. And that's probably something you learned later on, right? Because you were just trying to raise your kids and do the best you can with what you got, and what you got was a mess.
That's right.
He was not a man, he was a boy.
Yeah.
I mean, boys do the pornography, the infidelity, the lies, the secret world, all that kind of stuff, the betrayals. So that, I'm guessing that probably led to, if he didn't change, you had to. I
did. Well, and a lot of the message I got, especially in the church, was forgive, God restores, God restores, God restores. And so I was holding on, saying, God, you've got to restore this. But again, like I said, there weren't the healthy boundaries, there was not the changes. And so
he wasn't in a support group. He wasn't doing a polygraph. He wasn't doing counseling, or if he did, it wasn't sticking very well.
He did counseling through the years. He, you know, and I don't want to paint him as a totally horrible person, because there were many good years, but it was something that had a hold of him that he could not be free from, or did not do the work to be free from.
Right.
And so in 2013, I discovered that he was actually in an affair. And at that, that is different. And so when I found that out, I decided I could no longer stay in my marriage. And so I made the hardest decision of my life.
And that is hard.
It was absolutely the hardest decision.
People don't realize when you face a situation and you're faced with, the choices are all bad. And you have to pick out of those bad choices the best one that you possibly can for you and your family. And that can take months or even years to actually get the courage.
Absolutely.
To do it.
Yes.
Like, that's respectable. So you went through that process, and I know I've seen women go through that over 40 years. That was a big step. Okay, but then you're out there, and
I decided to stay single for 4 years.
Okay.
One is I was a licensed therapist at the time, and so I knew that I needed to heal. So I took 4 years to actually do my own healing work, but we had our youngest children were only 15. And so I decided to raise them, get them off to college so they wouldn't have to compete for my attention. I was just mom. And after they started college, I was 50 years old, and in 2017, I woke up and I just felt a stirring in my heart. And it said, this is the year you're going to be married again. And that kind of began the next journey that I found myself on. And you met what's your husband's name now? My husband's name is Andrew. How'd you meet Andrew? He seems like a nice guy. It was actually I met him online. It was kind of like a blind date. Happens to a lot of people, right? And I had 13 first dates. I was ready to hang it up, and he was going to be my last first date. And I met him on April Fool's Day. And we both knew almost immediately. And so we saw each other almost every day for a month. And Andrew's an engineer. And so about a week and a half into our dating, he looked at me and he said, I've asked Google how long I need to know somebody before I know I'm in love. And because he wanted to, he wanted to make sure he did it right.
It's funny.
And I was like, well, how long?
Right,
And
what
I
did
don't
Google
think
say?
I don't think it was the answer I wanted, so I told him to ask Siri.
Right.
But so he told me, he said, you know, I want to marry you. And so we just both knew this was the right thing. We had both been in long-standing marriages before, so it wasn't like, I mean, he was the first man I had seriously dated in 25 years, 26 years. And so things were going really well. And it had been 4 weeks, and my ex-husband contacted me. We'd had a friendly divorce. And let me say, there was never any physical violence in our marriage.
Good.
And so it had been 4 weeks, though, and he called me and said he wanted to talk to me about our adult children. This was not uncommon, so I stopped by his apartment.
Sure.
And he began to talk to me about wanting to date me again. And I said, I've moved on. I said, you need to move on. I've moved on. And he looked at me and he said, maybe I'm going to have to go talk to that man. And I had no clue what he meant, but something just didn't feel good. So I left and I called Andrew on my way home and I said, can I stop by your house just for a few minutes? Because I wanted to, one, warn him that my ex-husband might spread rumors, might harass him.
Yeah.
I didn't want him to scare Andrew off. And so I asked him, I said, Andrew, would you fight for me? And he looked at me and he said, of course I would. And when I asked him why, he said, because you're worth it. And little did I know that within 24 hours, Andrew was not just going to be fighting for me, but he was going to be fighting for his life. I went home that night, told Andrew good night. I went home. Something stirred in me and said, lock your bedroom door. I lived by myself. I was empty nesting. So I got up, locked my bedroom door, went to sleep. I was not scared, but at 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to my bedroom door crashing down off the hinges. And my ex-husband had broken into my home. He was intoxicated. He had a gun in his hand. And for the next 4 hours, I was assaulted.
Oh my gosh.
Following the assault, he kidnapped me. And he told me as punishment for ruining his life, I was going to have to watch him murder the man I had just started dating. And so he drove me to Andrew's house, and he reached in the back seat for the gun, for bullets. He looked over at me, and he said, now you go do whatever you need to do. And he left the keys in the ignition. So I jumped into the driver's seat, but I did see my ex-husband mount the 3 stairs up to the front of Andrew's house. I heard 3 gunshots, and I knew there was no way Andrew was going to survive this, and I made a getaway. I went to a super center, called 911, waited for the police and an ambulance to come and get me because I was pretty beat up at this time. And I would later learn that Andrew had been shot 10 times.
Oh my gosh.
So I was taken to the emergency room.
This is like the absolute worst case scenario. I mean, a lot of people, you think you have it bad. This is horrendous.
It felt like a bad dream.
You're beat up, you're confused, and then to hear this, and then to find out that the man that you just recently fell in love with has, I mean, take 10 bullets. I just saw him. I mean, he looks great, but that's a significant amount of bullets.
Well, I was in the emergency room, and I had only met, Andrew has 3 adult children, and I'd only met one of them, but he called my cell phone, and my adult daughter answered, and he said, we're sorry this happened to our parents, but we really think they should go their separate ways.
Well, of course, they're trying to protect their dad.
Absolutely.
Nobody wants their dad to die.
Well, especially after 4 weeks of meeting a woman and an ex-husband. You know, I don't blame them. But I was grieving that here, it felt like God had dangled a carrot in front of my face. Here, I finally am happy. I finally feel loved. And I did not hear from Andrew for the next, it was like 5 to 6 weeks. And during that time, I went and I lived at my uncle and aunt's house in town. They were going to Canada for the summer, and they offered me the use of their home so I wouldn't have to go back to the house where everything had happened in. And when they gave me a tour of their home, there was a beautiful big pergola in the backyard. And when I looked outside, I just knew that this was going to become a very holy ground, that I was going to begin my healing there.
Amen.
And so that's where, for the next 5 to 6 weeks, I would go wrap myself in a blanket. And the first few days, I would just weep.
Oh, of course.
And
I can
weep,
imagine.
you know, because it felt like it was a bad dream I was going to wake up from. And
you're still bruised. I mean, it's not like you weren't. I mean, you're still bruised. You're still hurt.
I was hurt physically, but I was very hurt emotionally.
Absolutely.
And I remember my first prayer crying to the Lord saying, I don't have any words to pray. I said, I feel so empty and so broken. And
beyond words kind of thing.
Beyond words. I didn't know your body. It's like I felt like my body was weeping. It was the hardest thing I've ever physically gone through. And I prayed and I asked the Lord, there's a scripture in Zephaniah that says that he will sing, God sings over us and rejoices over us. And I prayed and I said, Lord, I'm asking you to sing life back into my body because I'm empty. I'm so broken. And little by little, it's like I would play praise and worship music and I let that become the words of my prayers. And, you know, step by step, that healing began.
And did your first husband get arrested? Did he?
He was.
He was arrested, prosecuted, and all that?
He was.
Yeah,
he was arrested and prosecuted.
Rightfully so. Okay. All right. So then Andrew, he's also healing, and I mean, that many bullets, it would take more than 5 or 6 weeks to heal from.
Yes, I think he had almost, by the time, I think by now it's been like 13 surgeries.
Wow. Wow.
But his healing, we were separate during this time. I didn't hear from him. And in the beginning, I went into control mode because when something bad happens, you know, you want to get as much control and power as you can. And so I was telling all of my friends, this is how you need to pray, when you need to pray. Let's all pray. Andrew's got a Kim-shaped hole in his heart. And I was telling God, this is what you need to do, how you need to do it, when you need to do it. And finally I said, Lord, I'm scared to trust you. I said, I don't want to trust you.
Because, you know, as a counselor, trust is the issue.
Yes.
Because I have a whole chapter in the Partner Betrayal Trauma book, and it's on our website, that trauma gives you the opportunity to reset.
Yes.
And you can reset towards mistrust, which leads to addictions, secrets, problems, and issues and failure. Or you can lean towards trust, which is trusting good people.
Right.
A therapist.
Yes.
I'm sure you went to some counseling after all that trauma.
That was, you know what? I first called my pastor, then I called a therapist.
Yeah, and so but you leaned in.
Yes.
And that's a huge thing for a lot of you. If you're in trauma or you've been abandoned or your husband's cheating or whatever's going on with you, lean into good people. Lean into your pastor like Kimberly did. Lean into a therapist or a support group because that's
Weiss
life-changing.
counsel.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I've helped thousands of women in your situation, not that bad, but who've been cheated on and they got into a support group and they found life and they got encouragement. They were able to get back up.
Right.
You know, and so continue with your story.
Sure. Well, I finally got to the point where I told the Lord, I will choose to trust you no matter what the outcome. And it was about 5 or 6 weeks. I looked down at my phone.
That's important that you're like, okay, Lord, hands are off the driving wheel.
Now, I did tell the Lord. I
would prefer this outcome, but I'm not.
And I told him, I said, okay, I don't promise. Okay, I'll trust you, but I'll probably whine and complain a bit. I did tell the Lord, I'm going to whine and complain a bit.
Okay.
But I was at peace that, okay, with or without, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I looked down at my phone. I was at the pergola. I looked down at my phone, and there was a message from Andrew through Facebook Messenger because his kids had taken my phone number out of his phone.
Wow.
And so the message...
Hence he couldn't call you.
Right, right. And so it said, hey, I'm alive. Well, what do you say to that? Yay! And so I said, I am so sorry this happened. And I tried to explain that I had nothing to do with it. And I said, can I come see you? Because he was getting ready to go into the hospital. And he said, no, he was going in for surgery. His wounds had become infected. And he said, I'll contact you after the surgery. And he ended it by saying, take care. And I thought, what does take care mean? It's like, that doesn't mean I love you.
Well, he's an engineer, so
that's right.
Take it straight up, right?
That's right. So I waited, and it was probably 4 or 5 days, 6 days, and I got another message from him on Facebook Messenger, and it said a visit would be nice. Oh. And so we arranged for me to go to the hospital where he was, although I had to sneak around his kids.
Exactly.
He said, okay, don't come when my kids are here. And so I walked into his hospital room. He was all bandaged up, and I looked at him, and I said, Andrew, where does this leave us? And he said, I don't know. and my heart sank.
Sure.
He said, I've read all the felony counts. He goes, I know what happened to you, and you're going to be messed up. He said, I know what happened to me, and I'm going to be messed up. And something came over me, and I shook my finger in his face, and I said, Andrew Haar, you will never meet another woman like me. And 4 weeks later, we were engaged. 4 months later, we were married.
Wow.
And we've now been married 8 of the most wonderful years of my life.
So God did something beautiful.
Absolutely.
In his heart and yours.
Absolutely.